Truthfully, the bike barn ended up costing me $25.97 to build, but that's not as compelling of a title. Still, it was a really cool and sometimes challenging build, but that's just par for the course when you're using almost completely free and scavenged materials. So I'll show you how I went through that build process and then what I did end up having to spend a little bit of money on. So my first step in creating this bike barn was to find the materials to build it. Lumber is super expensive right now, so from an economical standpoint, it was awesome that I found all this wood. But for me, it's also mostly from a sustainability and environmental standpoint. Why not use what's just lying around? So to begin with, we had a bunch of pallets at work that we're not using, and they've just been lying in the warehouse. So I took a bunch of those. I also was on KSL, which is kind of like Utah's Craigslist, and I found that there was a couple. They were taking down their fence to build up a new one. So I went over there, they were super sweet, and they gave me a bunch of fence wood. And then the last big money find was, I was in this weird industrial area and I found this, I don't know what it was, but these big slats of wood with these 2 by 6 by 12 foot pieces of lumber going across them. And that was super useful because it allowed me to make the barn as long as I wanted the barn to be. And it was just really sturdy, solid wood. And then with that, I basically had enough materials to at least get started and have a place to go from. Is this river too loud? I hope not. So with the raw materials, the next step is processing all the wood. To get started, I took apart the pallets. I used a Sawzall for a lot of that, and a hammer and brute force. Went pretty well, took a while. Honestly, processing the wood is, when you're using these type of materials, one of the harder parts. Then when I got to taking apart the long sheets of wood, I found this awesome crowbar. I've never geeked out over a crowbar before, but first time for everything. You ever been super stoked about a crowbar? Because I have. Oh my God, it adjusts. And with the crowbar, it was quick work taking those apart, and I realized I could use that more for the pallets and everything, so having the right tool for the job really makes all the difference. And with that, I had all the wood processed pretty quickly and had kind of the materials then to start building the frame. But first, I needed a plan. My planning efforts in this project were somewhat minimal. I think when you're working with materials that you find, you're kind of at the mercy of those materials. So I kind of took stock of what I had and the dimensions that I could get from there, and I also measured my bike. And then I just started going at it. I did end up kind of taking it apart, putting it back together once or twice, and luckily I had also come off of making a workbench. So that kind of helped as far as how to butt up joints and stuff like that. I just kind of started putting things together. I did look at some just pictures and things like that for inspiration of how to do the roof. But other than that, my plans were sort of minimal, just some stuff scratched on paper and kind of kept creating as I went, which is a fun way to work, but it also leads to kind of a lot of taking apart, putting back together, trial and error. So I'm sure there's a faster way to do it, but it wasn't the way that I did it. The hardest part of building the frame is keeping everything level and square, and the fact that I was working alone didn't necessarily make it any easier. Definitely would have been an easier process with 2 people. But I have kind of a way that I build things that need to be square. Basically what I do is when I'm building, I only use 1 screw for each joint. And it's not just because I'm frugal, it's because when you only have 1 screw, everything can still pivot. And so when you're able to pivot it, you can put everything together and then adjust it so that it's actually level. And I used a T-square and a level to make sure that everything did end up actually being square. And then once you kind of have the whole thing built up, then I can put in a few more screws. If I'm going for this, I can move it around a little bit, and then finally, I'll put in another screw, and now it's actually more or less locked. I will say that doing the 1 screw thing works pretty well, but it is a little dangerous. At one point I was working under it and the whole thing just fell over and hit me in the head. So be a little bit careful. After taking some ibuprofen, I started working on the wall. The thing that made the wall go super fast was that my boss lent me a nail gun, and that was a huge game changer. If I had to nail in every nail I don't know, I would have done it, but it would have taken a while. So with the nail gun, it went really fast. The only thing that I really had to worry about was just the wood I had. It was different colors and different textures, just kind of lining it up nicely so that it looked, I don't know, rustic, but had a nice pattern, but didn't look too put together, kind of balancing that so that the overall kind of aesthetic of it was what I wanted. But that part went pretty easily, almost too easily. So then for the door, I was like, I should complicate this. So I decided I would do a cool little accent in the door. So using a jigsaw, I would cut out a circle. And to make the circle really precise, I took a piece of wood and drilled a hole in either end, one hole big enough for a pencil to go through. And then I put that piece of wood down and nailed the one end in, and then put the pencil in the other hole and just pivoted it around that nail so that I could draw that perfect circle. And that actually worked super well. And then it was just being slow and meticulous with the jigsaw and not going too quickly around the circle and taking my time. And I really liked how the door turned out. And then that kind of leads me to where I spent the money. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to find hardware that was used. I mean, I could have maybe looked for something at a thrift store to kind of harvest some hardware off of, but I also needed a lock. So I got the 2 hinges, the latch, and then the lock. So that is what ended up costing me the $25, which for a whole shed is not that bad. So then with the door, actually a neighbor helped me out, which was nice because I was kind of struggling balancing it on one foot, trying to screw things in and everything. So a neighbor came by and helped me hold that up while I got all the hardware in. And then the door was done, and the only thing left to do at this point was the roof. And the roof was probably one of the more difficult parts. And I just started with making 4 crossbars and cutting little slots into the crossbars so that they would lay nicely on the frame that I had already built. And then I drilled those in, and those all came out really nicely and it felt sturdy. And then after that, I took those big sheets of plywood that I had found and cut those up and then put them on. So I think I did 3 sections between the 4 crossbars and just put those on. And that was kind of like the subroof. And then on top of that, I found some plastic like sheeting for painting, I believe. I staple gunned that plastic sheeting on, and I figured that would add a lot of waterproofness to it. And then after that, my neighbor had been seeing what I was doing, and I have a lot of nice neighbors, and he had just helped his daughter put a roof on her shed. And so he brought me a pretty sizable piece of roofing, and that almost covered the whole thing. I did end up adding some wood on either end. You know, it would have been nice to have the full roof, but sometimes when you're working with free materials and stuff like that, you know, beggars can't be choosers. So it worked out well. And I really liked how the roof turned out. It looks nice, and again, just putting on the roofing structure itself added a lot of stability to the whole barn, and it's solid now. It's one of my favorite projects I've ever built. Looks beautiful in the springtime in the canyon and everything, so I love it. If you enjoyed watching this video, feel free to subscribe. I'll be putting up more videos on other sustainable projects I do. I'm hoping to do a compost in the future, so yeah, thanks. Hopefully that all recorded. I think it did.